Titletown, president of the Muskies Inc. chapter there, current member of the Titletown Muskies Inc. Bob came to me a couple of days ago with a request to kind of talk about and me to utilize my platform, however big or small that is, but to get the word out about some of these rule changes and regulation changes that have taken place recently within the state of Wisconsin regarding muskie season opener. I tried, this was like my best attempt to get something in and out there before the community forums on the 13th start to take place in the county. I don't want to say the county seats because it's not county seats. I talked to Taylor Flannery and his is at a school, but there's a bunch of community forums and proposal spots throughout the northern counties of Wisconsin that will be taking place tomorrow. So this is my attempt to get some info out there before that happens. Anyway, Bob, I'll kind of let you take it from there. And I know that you've been doing a lot of work both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes related to some of this stuff, and hopefully can add some clarity to what's going on and where people may have questions.
Absolutely. First off, I just want to thank you first and foremost for your generosity in providing this platform to get this information out to the muskie angling public. There's a lot of confusion out there regarding the revised muskie opener, and hopefully we can clear some of that up tonight. A couple of things we want to go through today is some basic bullet points, and I'll delve into each of these in a little more detail as we go forward. First off, just want to start with some of the history of how we got to a split zone opener, and now that it's being eliminated, we're going to have a statewide unified opener, same date across the state. But I want to give some history on that, where we've come from to get us to where we're at now. But also I want to talk about the timeline that was involved in this new proposal change that's going into effect here this year for the northern zone of Wisconsin. Also, some folks may have heard that there's been an exemption for Green Bay and its tributaries up to the first dam that protects our fish and protects our waters, and we're exempted from the new proposal. So anything that you see online stating that, hey, you can fish for muskies in Green Bay on the first Saturday of May, that's not correct. We are still the last we're the Saturday closest to Memorial Day. That's usually about 3 or 4 weeks after the southern zone opener. So nothing has changed there, and I want to make sure that people understand that. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And then also after that, I want to talk about some next steps here. There are some counter proposals that are being put forth here that Conservation Congress meetings tomorrow night, and I want to get into a little more detail on that and what the thought process behind that and what people can expect. And then if there's any time left over, I can give you guys a quick stocking update on where we're at this year. We had a great year last year. And then also, finally, I want to provide some watch outs for anybody who's planning on fishing Green Bay this year, because we have some very, very low water out there, and that's going to limit our options as far as launching, things like that. So if anybody's coming from out of state, they need to be aware of some of these things. If we don't get a lot of water raising here in the next couple months or so, it's going to be slim pickings as far as your options for launching, and danger also in some of these spots too. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. So that's kind of where we're at as far as the agenda for today. I guess I can just kind of start off real quick with the history. Wisconsin has been split into two separate and independent muskie management zones since 1984. We've got the southern zone and a northern zone. The line of demarcation between those southern and northern zone is Highway 10. And Highway 10 runs from Lake Michigan in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, goes over the tip of Lake Winnebago, across the mid-state to Stevens Point, and it ends up just around on the Mississippi River, about a half hour south of the Twin Cities near Hastings, Minnesota. And that's in Prescott, Wisconsin. That's where it ends. So anything above that is the northern zone, anything below that is the southern zone. Now, since 1984, we've had separate openers for the Wisconsin muskie season. The southern opener has always been the first Saturday in May, and the northern zone opener, anything above Highway 10, has been the Saturday closest to Memorial Day, which is, again, about 3 or 4 weeks later. So historically, our fishing season was shortened. Before 1984, they didn't have the shortened season. Again, that was 42 years ago, and that was actually revised back in 1984 as part of a DNR muskellunge management plan that was devised in 1979. Back then, there was a lot of harvest for fish. In fact, harvest was the main concern at the time. Back then, every single legal muskie was kept and killed. Every single one, almost. But
Yeah, I remember my wife's grandpa talking about those days. You know, when they would go up there, they would have like community muskie fries or whatever with all the people in their little local spot at the cabin, or even they'd freeze them and bring them back here and do it.
And the numbers will astound you, because what they did, the DNR calculated what the annual muskie harvest was each year. And at that time, they had determined that there's around 67,000 muskies harvested yearly. The number is actually like 66,700 something, but almost 67,000 muskies. So at that time, the minimum length limit was 30 inches as well. So they in 1984, not only did they shorten the season, but they also increased the minimum size range from 30 inches to 32 inches at that time. So the objective of that process in 1984 of shortening the season at that time was to maintain an annual harvest of over 65,000 muskies. So, which is unbelievable when you think about it. But obviously, we've got a lot of catch and release right now. Today, muskie harvest is basically a non-issue. Well, we've got relatively high minimum length limits right now. Typically 40 inches or larger on most of the lakes in Wisconsin. Plus, due to the prevalence of catch and release, voluntary catch and release, the actual seasons themselves have very little influence on muskie management strategies. What I mean by that is that stocking and conservation efforts for these lakes are implemented based on what the system requires, regardless of when the season opens. So they're still moving forward with what they, in order to, manage these systems and keep them healthy. One thing I want to mention is that, I mentioned the 67,000 muskies annually, but over the last several years, I've got some data from the DNR that shows that the annual harvest right now, for the past several years, is estimated at around 237 fish per year, compared to almost 67,000 in 40 years ago. So that's a 99.6% decrease versus what we saw in the 80s. So in fact, since 2016, only 3 harvested muskies have been observed by DNR creel surveys. So overharvest is essentially a non-issue right now these days, or at least it's negligible. So that's good news. So that covers kind of the history of the muskie seasons, where we come from, and where we're at today. And again, they split those. You got the northern, southern openers. So next up, I want to give folks just an overview on how these rule changes are put in place. Put in place, as Matt mentioned earlier, we've got the Wisconsin Conservation Congress annual spring hearings that are taking place tomorrow night in person. And just so everybody understands that the state of Wisconsin holds these annual spring hearings as an opportunity for the public to provide input on a wide array of natural resources related proposals, any questions that are presented by the DNR, as well as advisory questions that are presented by the Wisconsin Conservation Congress, which is the WCC. The Wisconsin Conservation Congress is very unique. It is a statutorily created organization of citizens that are elected, and what they do is they advise the Natural Resources Board, or the NRB, and the DNR on how to manage Wisconsin's natural resources. They are the only body in the state where the residents elect delegates to advise on these types of policies. So it holds an annual spring hearing for public input, and it could be on hunting, fishing, environmental issues, you name it. Each of the 72 counties in Wisconsin has 5 delegates that are assigned to the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. And again, these folks are elected to represent the interests of the people in their specific county. They're typically outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen who are very, very involved in a wide array of outdoors activities and conservation. So they're elected to gather information and convey the wishes of the residents regarding natural resources policy, research, conservation, things of that nature. So this is unique to Wisconsin. No other state that I'm aware of has citizens who participate in what we do. So in that sense, we are blessed to have a say in natural resources policy across the state. So The annual, go ahead.
No, I just said totally. It's super unique, and that's a cool thing that Wisconsin does.
It is. Again, we are super blessed and very fortunate there. So the annual spring hearing conducted by the Wisconsin Conservation Congress, or WCC, provides this platform for us to weigh in on certain items, rule changes, things like that, where we've got a direct say in the matter. We can actually vote on them. And there's a ballot that's presented on the On the website, you can go check it out on the DNR website. Just type in Congress, spring hearing, whatever you want. It'll get you. You can see all the questions that are going to be on the docket this year. Now, the Unified Opener is not on the ballot this year. There is something related to it that I'll get into a little bit here, but the actual voting on this is done, okay? And it's going into effect this year. So that's done. But again, we do have a say in what goes on here, and there's a counter proposal that's coming up here that people might be interested in as well. So the WCC also considers some resolutions that are presented in person during the county spring hearings. And that's one of the things that I kind of alluded to here, is that we've got something coming up, is that they actually allow people to like write a resolution. It has to be formatted in a specific fashion, and they're able to present that at the Conservation Congress meetings. They're just basically raising the alarm, saying, or they're just saying, hey, here's something that we're interested in getting on the docket, maybe next year, the year after, what have you. This is a great concern to a lot of anglers, and here's what we want to do. So that we've got something like that coming up here very soon. Now, again, the spring hearings are scheduled for tomorrow night in person. For instance, my spring hearing is at the Northeast Wisconsin Technical College at 6 o'clock. I'll be there in person. You can vote in person or you can vote online anywhere between Monday and Wednesday. So in person is Monday night only. Online is Monday through Wednesday. So as far as where we're at today, how do we get to where we're at right now? You know, there's three primary ways that new regulations get passed in Wisconsin. First one is the DNR just makes a recommendation, says, hey, do this. Another one is the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. Again, these elected officials for each county get together and they submit a proposal based on the input that they've received from their constituents. And then the third way to do this is what's called a citizen's resolution, whereas any citizen throughout the state can say, hey, here's what I want on my body of water, or here's a rule change that I propose. And if you can get enough traction on that and there's enough support for that, then it gets put through and, goes up the chain of command and eventually gets voted on. So there's actually a form on the DNR website where it shows you how to go through this process and the form you have to fill out specifically. So, as I mentioned, we've got 5 local delegates elected for each county. They make proposals. These have to be submitted to the DNR for research and approval and eventually voted on by the public the following year. The process itself historically has taken about 2 years or so, but more recently it takes probably about 4 years for some of these items to pass. Jordan Weeks has explained to me, and also he's explained on a recent podcast, that I recommend anybody who has any questions regarding the new Unified Opener. I'm just kind of rehashing a lot of the stuff that he's put out there as well, but in case people haven't had a chance to see that yet, Chaz Martin has a YouTube channel called Musky Mastery. He also has a podcast called Musky Therapy. And he was on there probably about a month or so ago, and he gave an explanation of the process. That's pretty much what I'm going through now.
I listened to that as well. Really good info in that.
Yeah, excellent info on there. In 2019, there was a citizens resolution that was put forth specifically for Vilas and Oneida counties only. Those 2 counties up north, Musky capital of the North Woods there. Some local anglers got together and said, hey, here's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see a earlier opener. We'd like to unify our opener with the southern zone, our 2 counties. And initially at that point, also there was also a harvest component included in that, which stated they could only be catch and release in the month of May, but it's recently been kind of thrown out. But that was the first proposal that came around in 2019. It passed. DNR acknowledged it. But the Wisconsin Conservation Congress and the DNR, they chose not to act on it. Now, they're not obligated to do anything with any proposal. They're not obligated to do anything. They can sit on it, whatever. They actually did see that there was some overwhelming response on it. So what they wanted to do is get some more information before they actually took action. So in 2020, a citizens resolution was brought up again for Vilas and Oneida counties. It passed again, about 24,000 to 9,000 in favor. So the Wisconsin Conservation Congress at that time took the proposal under advisement. Now, no action was taken by the DNR until 2021, when they asked the DNR to look into the proposal further. So what the DNR then does is they perform what's called a literature search. And they do their due diligence and look at all the available research out there on the topic, any prior season changes, any studies that have been done to support whatever the proposal is, or to counteract the proposal. And again, that literature search was conducted and led by Jordan Weeks with the help of Tim Simonson, who's been a long time DNR Muskie advocate, and so he's got a long history there, and some really great guys working on that. So what the DNR team decided to do then is advance an advisory question for the 2022 spring hearings. The stated purpose was to simplify the state regulation, statewide. Had the same thing, up there versus down here. They removed that catch and release component, but also expanded it statewide. Now, again, at first it was just the two counties. They voted on twice in those two counties, and then later on, without anybody knowing about this, they said, well, let's try it statewide, just to make sure that it's uniform across the entire region here. That passed. Again, about 10,000 people in favor to 3,000 people against. And then that advisory question is the advisory questions are asked a year before the binding question goes into effect. All fisheries advisory questions are asked on even years, and the binding questions are on odd years. So the advisory is just says, hey, here's what we want to do, and if we get enough support for that, okay, now it's binding the next year. So if it passes, it's brought back the following year as binding question. In 2023, the binding question was asked again, and it passed again, about 4,000 in favor to about 1,300 against. So overwhelmingly, again, a lot of people voted for the unified opener. That was voted on in 2023, and it was actually supposed to go into effect in 2024. And you'll hear a lot of people that are stating that, hey, this new regulation that we've got, this really took a lot of people by surprise. I got blindsided by this, and rightfully so. It was supposed to actually get implemented in 2024, but there was still some behind-the-scenes procedural issues that needed to get resolved first. So it actually sat there. People kind of forgot about it, but it was actually still a live item for 2 years. It's supposed to go into effect in 2024. Nobody saw anything happen. Okay, must be a dead deal. No, we're still alive behind the scenes. And 2024 came around, nothing. 2025, nothing. And now, all of a sudden, boom, 2026. Here it is. It's binding, and now it's we've got. It is the law of the land going forward here. So that's why a lot of folks were kind of taken by surprise. I understand.
Well, I think a lot of folks probably, like me, either voted on the survey, voted on the resolution, whatever the case may be, related to that, and then saw that it didn't move forward within the timeline that was assigned to it, and assumed that, well, it just didn't pass or didn't meet the muster to continue on in terms of the parliamentary process. So then when this resolution was reintroduced and, this rule change goes into effect, then anglers understandably feel a little caught off guard by that, thinking that, okay, well, this was alarming in 2023, whatever, but like at the timeline that it's supposed to happen, it didn't. So now, 2 years later, people are like, well, I thought that this was done, settled, taken care of. So, where does that leave us now? And I think that anglers, guides, people in northern Wisconsin, are right to feel a little bit, caught off guard by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of always had my finger on the pulse here because I knew about it when it came around in 2019. I was kind of keeping my eye on it back then, just because I thought, well, just these two counties. Eventually, if it passes up there, I saw it pass, and I like, well, if it's there, Sawyer County's next, and then the rest of the state, and then Green Bay as well. So, so anyhow, as far as the communication, I'll get into some of that in a little bit here. But as far as the communication is concerned, Jordan Weeks on that Muskie Therapy podcast did state flat out, we kind of dropped the ball as far as communication is concerned. We had a press release of some sort. Unfortunately, we didn't, and that's why another reason a lot of people felt blindsided. But what he committed to doing on that podcast is that he is actually putting together a new document that will be released before the opener that should help explain the details and clarify any questions that a lot of people have. I haven't seen it yet. I'm probably going to reach out to him in the next week or so just to see how that's coming along, and just make sure that once it does get out, that me and the rest of the folks from Titletown and all the buddies I got throughout the state, we get that word out and make sure that everybody understands what. The main thing is just education. There's a lot of questions that people have just because they don't, you know, it wasn't communicated clearly. So obviously that's why, I mean, it's understandable why there's a lot of questions and a lot of head scratching going on right now as far as who's involved, who does this affect? Does it affect me? No, what, you know? So that's some of the things that we're looking forward to seeing here in the near future. Hopefully that gets out. One of the things that I want to touch on also is some of the conclusions that were drawn as far as why this unified opener was pushed through. And it's not just based on people voting at all. Obviously, that has a lot to do with it. You know, we want to represent the will of the people, obviously, but there are scientific factors that go into this as well. The basic conclusions that we came to at that time was that, number one, there is no legitimate biological reason to restrict anglers from legally targeting muskies any time of the year, given the fact that we've got voluntary catch and release. That ethic has been spread throughout the angling community. That results in this negligible harvest that we see throughout the year, and as well as handling mortality. People are getting a lot smarter and better at handling some of these fish too. So what they thought is that this proposal will allow more legitimate fishing opportunities for musky anglers with no anticipated harm to the resource. Now, that's the conclusion that was put forth and drawn up by the DNR themselves based on scientific data and studies, everything they had available. But one other thing I want to mention here is that it's important for anglers to understand that this is not a set it and forget it regulations change. There are benchmarks in place to evaluate the effectiveness of this new rule change. What that means is the DNR have to continue to monitor the harvest of muskies within the using the standardized creel surveys, and they're going to review the results annually to determine whether the harvest increases as a result of this or if it doesn't change, what have you. So what they're going to take a look at is if they've got a 6-year running average and a total of that harvest ever consistently exceeds the previous benchmark, which I mentioned is 237, for 3 consecutive years, they're going to go back to the NRB, the Natural Resources Board, and with a new proposal to shorten the open season for muskies again on inland waters north of Highway 10. So it's not permanent. They're going to monitor this, and it actually could be rescinded if we do start seeing higher than normal harvest out there. One other thing that I wanted to mention regarding the benchmarks that they're setting. Not only is there the harvest issue, but there's also the fishery health as far as the numbers, the population abundance.
Right. So
they're still going to be evaluating any trends in population abundance using their standardized population estimation procedures, and just to make sure the overall health of the musky fishery is stable. If there's any indicators that they see that indicates that there's declines in abundance on any of these that can't be attributed to any other factors outside of the rule change, then that'll be used in conjunction with the harvest data that they've got in order to, again, shorten the open season again. So again, it's not permanent, and if we do see drastic changes, then they're going to be monitoring that. There's a couple of different factors that are going to be taken into account here that, again, on top of everything you already mentioned, as well, that those, obviously there's other concerns aside from just purely scientific data, and, harvest numbers and population abundance, but it's not an easy, it's complicated. It is, and I understand why there's still some confusion on this, but hopefully, like I said, we'll be coming out with something soon to help clarify that. And that's kind of why I reached out to you and see if we can at least get some information out there for folks to unmuddy the water.
Totally. We don't really know what is going to happen with this this extension, good or bad, until it happens, which I think also is giving a lot of anglers, guides, resorts, whatever the case may be, in the Northwoods pause about some of these regulation changes, is just because of the fact that we don't necessarily know. It could be fine. And the muskies, do their thing and live like all the other fish. And hopefully that's the case. But at the same time too, I think it's worthwhile to validate, some of those concerns from those anglers, resort owners, guides, all things. So Yeah. So so talk about Green Bay, Bob. We haven't quite got there yet as to how this rule change impacts Green Bay, or doesn't
Well,
impact Green Bay, I guess I
it
should say.
doesn't impact us at all. That's because, again, back in 2019, when I saw the first vote on it and thought, hey, this might eventually spread throughout the North Woods or the entire Northern Zone, I don't have a crystal ball or anything. It was just kind of a hunch. So reaching out to our biologists, things like that, just making sure that where we're at as far as our conservation efforts are concerned, and making sure that we are preserving those, doing whatever we can. Now, when this was proposed again in 2021, we saw that it was voted on again overwhelmingly, and then 2023 they came out and okay, now it's the entire state. So our hunches were kind of, we're on point there as far as where this might lead. So, obviously, reaching out to our biologists, our wardens, talking to folks at DNR headquarters in Madison at the state level, as well as, I reached out to a bunch of, muskie folks northeast Wisconsin, talking to presidents, their members, things like that, and just making sure that they understand what our goals are as far as the Green Bay system is concerned, where we're at from a restoration project standpoint. That's one of the reasons why it was exempted, is because the biologists have to sign off on this for every county. And if they say no, then it's not going to be put through. And that's why initially those people who thought it was put forth the first time and keeps getting shot down or not action. I spoke to the person who actually made the proposal and told them flat out that, if you include some language in there that will exclude Green Bay and its tributaries up to the first dam, it'll probably get passed because it might be getting held up just because our biologists are saying no. So nevertheless, we already had commitment from our biologists that they would not approve this. And if it did get approved statewide, there would be an asterisk there, an exemption stating that, hey, Green Bay is not included in this. Now that's because Green Bay is a restoration project. And this goes all the way back to the Clean Water Act of 1972. So this is not anything that's new. Is the federal government came in and said, listen, your entire watershed is a cesspool, and it's bad news from an environmental standpoint. You guys clean this up. So we had the world's largest PCB removal program, 15-year program that ended in 2020. And then also, while just as we're starting to see some weeds come back and we're putting in some new woody structures, some riprap and some gravel bars and things like that throughout the entire watershed, establishing some new marshland as well. So it's a work in progress. Biologists are thinking, listen, let's at least give our fish a chance. Right in the midst of this, and all of a sudden this couldn't come at a worse time as far as what the public is telling us that they want, but also versus what we're trying to accomplish here as far as restoring these muskies, which are native to the area, but they are almost completely wiped out. I mean, almost completely wiped out by the mid-20th.
Yeah. So ultimately, the goal of Green Bay is to just reestablish that natural reproduction, the natural fishery that exists in the capacity that it can in a modern time.
Natural reproduction on Green Bay is statistically zero. There are some fish out here that are reproducing naturally. We catch fish without fin clips and without pit tags and things like that, that we were told by the biologists years ago, well, if it doesn't have a fin clip, just assume that it's a natural reproduction. It's an NR. So we do see a lot of those fish, but we don't have enough data to draw any solid conclusions to state that, is it 3% of the population? Is it 13? Is it 23% of the population that's naturally? So that's why we're, as a chapter for Titletown Muskies Inc., is we're really focusing hard on pit tags and pit tag readers and making sure that we get enough data to help the biologists out and let them know that, hey, because we've had a lot of folks that were trained by the state or by the DNR and registered with the state in order to actually put pit tags in a fish that doesn't have one in it. So if it doesn't have any fin clips, no pit tag, we can presume it's an NR, and then that'll be added to our database. So we've already got almost, I think, over 200 fish. I think almost, over 300 fish now for the past 2 seasons, just by, a handful of guys and guides, as well as folks in our chapter putting these pictures. So that's good news there, and we're able to get some additional data and try to get a better handle on how much natural reproduction there is. But also, not just that, is that we've been stocking for a lot of years in areas that we found out later through studies that were conducted by the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, their graduate researchers came to, say, the Fox River. That's a 7-mile stretch that we've got here. And they found out that, 1.3% of that entire 7-mile stretch is suitable habitat for spawning. This is before 2020. 2017 and 2020 is when they did the study. But now that project has ended and we're seeing weeds pop up now, and it's coming back to life right now. So that's good news. And we just want to make sure that we don't disturb that. And that's kind of the thought process that the biologists had on why they wanted to protect our system here.
Bob, you talked.
Go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead. No, you go.
Item regarding the Unified Opener, and this is kind of a corollary to where we're at today as far as, hey, obviously the rule change is going into place this year, whether anybody likes it or not. So it is what it is.
Right.
However, you'd mentioned the podcast, that the Backlash podcast. It's the most recent one. It's got Pete Mena and Matt on there. And they're talking about the new proposal. But Pete said that he was, he went to the Wausau show, and almost everybody is coming up to him and saying, hey, listen, this is bad news. We need to put it back. And he was kind of like, you look at the voting numbers, and everybody overwhelmingly wanted this. But now everybody who's talking to all these musky anglers, the real hardcore and serious anglers, are saying that we don't want this. So what he has done is they put together another citizens resolution, basically, and they're going to be presenting it at the Conservation Congress hearings tomorrow night. And what they've done is they've identified people in every single county that's going to basically go out and advocate for this. It's not on the ballot. Okay, what it is you can actually write a resolution and bring it to the Conservation Congress, and they'll put it up on the back wall, or they'll take it off and they'll read it out in front of everybody, and they'll have somebody come up or they can read it. Here's what we propose. Here's our title. Here's the abstract, and here's our actual proposal. And then if you can generate enough interest, the Conservation Congress might say, hey, looks like there's a lot of chatter about this, a lot of concern. Let's maybe add this to the docket next year, and it might actually be on the ballot. So that's the plan there. Is what they're trying to do is get this back to a split zone opener. And the resolution to reintroduce split zone muskie season in the interest of the fisheries health. There's a big abstract that goes along with this. It's a couple paragraphs long, but the actual proposal itself, it says, in light of everything that we've just told you in this abstract, do you support changing the muskie season opener back to the original Saturday prior to Memorial Day in the northern region, while allowing the southern opener to remain the first Saturday in May? That's the proposal right there. And that's what's going to be put forth at every Conservation Congress meeting tomorrow night. It's not going to be on the ballot online, anything that you for voting. But if you've got an opinion about this, definitely show up tomorrow night. Whether you're for it or against it, doesn't matter. At least let the Conservation Congress know that this is something that interests you. Just make your voice heard. That's the main thing. So just want to make sure people understand that, it's law now this year for inland Wisconsin, northern zone, but there are people working to reverse that. So whether you're for it or against it, again, show up at the spring hearings and make your voice heard.
Well, and I think that's a good point, Bob, because fundamentally utilizing the parliamentary process to change the rule that people don't necessarily agree with, and rather than it being shuffled in a bunch of other resolutions or surveys or whatever the case may be, we're the idea here is to put that forward as its own thing, a solo thing, with the state fish of Wisconsin basically on the ballot, and then utilize that parliamentary process to push the people's agenda forward and allow people to utilize their voices at these Conservation Congress. Because in full disclosure, our family has a cabin in Sawyer County, and we utilize those resources for enjoyment. And I would be lying if I wasn't caught off guard by those things. I would be lying if I didn't look forward to utilizing those natural resources to take my kids and fish and try and musky fish and teach them how to musky fish in the places that I learned how to do it from my father-in-law. I am not from Wisconsin, but I do have a lot of skin in the game as far as that is concerned. So I get why people feel so passionately about it. Well, and also like over the past couple of years, I've started to, even being a teacher, I'm fortunate to be able to have summers off so I can supplement my income through guiding up there if people want to take me up on it. So like, there's two reasons why, I have more skin in the game than most out of state residents, not to say that others don't, but yeah, that place has been in the family since 1969, and like I think everyone in my family would like to see it continue to 2069 and on from there. So like, yeah. Anyway, that's I won't get too much more on my soapbox about that. So Bob, what do you got for stocking updates related to Green Bay? You made mention of that earlier, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to talk about those things as well. Because rather than talk about like some of the negative things or maybe even positive in terms of the unification of the Muskie community around a central issue, at least the Muskie community in Wisconsin, we can talk about some of the positives that are coming to arguably one of, if not the best, muskie fishery in the world.
Absolutely. Just to give you some numbers that we had from our 2025 netting survey on the Fox River, that survey captured 196 muskies up to 55 plus inches. 51 of those muskies were recaptures. 100% of the fish that we got in our nets, if they didn't have a pig tag in them before, they have a pig tag in them now. So the average length on those, the females average 49.6 inches, average, and the males average 42.8. So we got about a 50-inch average size female. The males are about 43. Although we do get males that are much bigger. We get males that are over 50, almost every year. So those, just some, I guess, overview of what we saw in our nets. As far as the stocking is concerned, well, a lot of us went out to the Wild Rose Hatchery, which is about an hour and a half from here. We captured the males and females in the spring in the Fox River. We take the eggs and the milk out of them. We fertilize them at the launch, and we ship them out to the hatchery to be raised over the summer, and they're released throughout the watershed in the fall. So those average about 11 inches. That's the average size. Well, we had 13,888 fingerlings that we finished up and captured, were released back into the watershed throughout the entire Green Bay watershed this past October. So if you're looking at when we started stocking out here in 1989, so from 1989 to 2024, we had 219,874 fingerlings and 41,533 yearlings. So the yearlings are fish that are released on average about minimum of 13 inches plus. And those have a much, much higher survival rate than your fingerlings do. So we're trying to get as many yearlings as possible. That's also why this pit tag reading program that we've got right now is going to be very helpful in that respect, because what we're trying to do is convince the state to put more yearlings in. And they're going to start doing that again next year, which is great because it ceased for a little bit. So that means that we're going to be starting to get more yearlings out here as well. So we're looking at probably about 16,000 fingerlings next year and then another 8,000 yearlings. Our record was about 3 years ago, 7,500 yearlings that we stocked. So we're going to exceed that going forward, and that's hopefully we can keep that going. So all in all, since day one, since we started stocking in 1989, we've got over 275,295 muskies that have been stocked. So that's over 250,000 muskies, which is good. It's respectable, but look at, we've got over 1 million acres out here. We've got 1.04 million acres in the Green Bay watershed. That's one fish for every 4 acres. And that's not really high density. But so, and obviously there's mortality out here too. And, when they're released at that fingerling stage, they're more susceptible to predation, which is why I want to focus on more of those extended growth yearlings. So that's kind of where we're at. One other thing too that I think I mentioned when you and I were on last was October 2024. So I was in the midst of working with the DNR on identifying some additional spots out in the Green Bay watershed. Again, I mentioned a lot of the tributaries that we've been stocking for a lot of years have very, very little suitable habitat. Now, we're restoring those now. It's a work in progress, but we've also been able to identify specific areas out in the bay proper, not necessarily the tributaries. The first rated forestry program that UW Stevens Point did in 2017 and 2020 was strictly for tributaries. In 2024, they started doing it in the bay itself. Now, a new graduate student came in and said, I want to start looking out in the bay, but I don't know where to start. So they reached out to our chapter and said, hey, if anybody's got any information to help us get pointed in the right direction, please let us know. So I got together with another guy out here, Chris Barch. He's out there walleye fishing before the season's even open, and he's seeing muskies paired. He's getting some incidental catches on flicker shads or what have you once in a while, so he knows exactly where these are. So we gave them like 25 actual waypoints, and I gave them about 34 areas, some general maps, like here's a couple 100-yard stretch here on this area where I'm seeing fish that I've seen throughout the years, and it's going all over the entire Green Bay watershed. So not only are we stocking in the tributaries, but now we're starting to stock in some new spaces out in the bay itself. And that just recently started the past couple of years. So we're excited to see how that happens. We've identified 3 new areas that look really, really great as far as suitable habitat that have been confirmed by the biologists and the this should be an optimal spot to stock muskies going forward. So we took some of those fish that were typically slated to be put into the river. Obviously, you want to still continue stocking the fox, even though it's got very low, suitable habitat. We still want to have a continuing population of adults returning, because once things do pick up out there and we do start seeing bee growth and we see more suitable habitat, then we'll still have all these. We'll have to start all over and put a new batch of muskies in to hopefully get there someday. So that's kind of the thought process there, and we're seeing a lot of good stuff from the researchers that came to us and said, hey, we went to that first spot you gave us, spot number 1, and we saw 3 pairs, which is very encouraging. So we've got the head biologist from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, Dan Demkowski, going to be coming to our chapter, I believe, in August. It's tentatively slated. He's going to give us a recap on that program, the 2-year program that research student did, and it looks pretty good from what we're seeing so far.
I was going to ask you too, Bob. Do you know offhand? I know that there have been several southern zone inland lakes selected for Green Bay or Great Lakes strain fish. I know Geneva is one of them. Do you know of the others offhand? Because I just don't. I don't know them offhand, and I just didn't know. I mean, it's a cool project that the Wisconsin DNR is doing, and I was just curious if you knew some of the other lakes.
Geneva's the main one, and I think we talked about that last time too, as far as
Right.
Already got but it's we're going to see some absolute super tankers down there once our fish start getting big too. As far as any of the other systems, I'm not really. I quite frankly, I don't really follow. My focus is on Green Bay. I'm not sure if Madison has got any of our fish in there. Maybe somebody in the audience can help us out there a little bit. I'm not quite sure.
Right, and I think that kind of gets to Jeff Widman's point from their podcast this past week, where just in a perfect world, stocking muskies in the places that they should be basically solves all the problems. But I understand that there's a lot of barriers to entry there. Especially in a place like Wisconsin that has so many different lakes, different bodies of water, all the things. Here in Iowa, we've got like 10 lakes, and it's not great, but at the same time, we know that those lakes are getting fish and going to receive fish on a regular or semi-regular basis. So at the very least, we know it's going to happen. We don't have to worry as much about the trend lines of weather, reproduction, these cycles of boom and bust that kind of plague fisheries at times, especially in the northern zone, northern Wisconsin, all of these different places that have them, and they just rely on natural reproduction, I guess. Before we go, Bob, you wanted to talk about some stuff on Green Bay that you probably wanted prospective anglers to look out for as far as opener is concerned, especially if they're traveling.
Absolutely. As I mentioned last time we talked, my season, I've got a preseason basically, starts, a month or two ahead of our opener, just to doing up a lot of recon on a lot of tributaries and all throughout the Green Bay watershed, up in Door County, up the West Shore, and just checking to see how things are looking. And, we've had, one thing people need to realize is that we have to deal with fluctuating water levels here that go in cycles out of the bay. it pretty much bottomed out, I'd say around 2012 or so. We had very low water levels, and then they started bouncing up. 2015, 16, finally around 2018, 19, our water levels were at record highs, over 3 feet above the normal pool level. And then all of a sudden, after the ice out of 2020, ice pushed out, dragged a lot of the water with it, sucked it all down. We lost over 18 inches in 24 hours, the entire Green Bay watershed. And then it's slowly been decreasing since. And what we've been seeing is, especially like last year, right now the water levels are about 3 feet. We're about 2.5 to 3 feet low to where they normally are. And then this year they're down at about another 1.5 feet or so. So what that means is there's a lot of stumps and hazards and things and rock bars. And so it's important to understand that you need to be careful out here, especially if anybody's going to be coming out here and fishing, say, the shark fin. The shark fin is a shoal that we've got. It's about 15 miles north of the mouth of Fox River in Green Bay. And it extends 2.5 miles out into the bay. It's a big, big shoal. And just below that, there's a reef called Gano's Reef. Now, that is a solid rock structure that's several football fields big. And for many years, like in 2018, 19, you can actually go up and fish on top of it in 4 feet of water. Guys are fishing for walleyes and stuff up there. But now the water's way down, you need to avoid that at all costs. And make sure you have that on. If you're planning on making a run up to, say, shark fin and want to run down the little tail, you have to go past that. And make sure you've got that on your graphs, and make sure you avoid it at all costs. It will absolutely destroy your lower unit. Another thing, too, along with this is that because of the lower water levels, a buddy of mine who's in the chat here, Chase Muskelunge, he and I went up 2 weeks ago, hit every tributary on the way down. Started at Michigan and all, worked our way down, just checking water levels, checking flow, things like that, looking for any visible hazards. And we did notice that some of these launches are going to be actually unlaunchable. If you've got a decent-sized boat, for instance, Pensauke, not just Pensauke, but Gano's also. Gano's launch over at the shark fin, they just dredged that out 2 years ago, but even last year, it was tough getting out. I saw some guys in 620s, 621s really struggling to get out of that. There's a channel that, it's got 2 rock walls, and you go through this narrow channel till you get out to the bay. These guys are churning up nothing but mud. And I got a 19-foot boat, but, I draft pretty well. I was still churning up mud. And the 1 or 2 times I launched it, I rarely launched it. So that's going to be very difficult, and people might not be able, especially if you get a south wind, it's going to suck all that water out of there. There's a lot of times, there was a walleye tournament a couple of years ago. A bunch of guys actually launched at Gano's, and then the wind switched, and it pulled all the water out of that channel. And you got all these guys in these big walleye boats, they can't get in the channel. Drop their money off, get this stuff and drive and meet them down in Swamico, another 10 miles away, just because they couldn't get back in that channel. So it's even worse this year. So it's even lower. Another thing, too, is on Pensauke. They've got this slab, on the launch. There's 14 slats of concrete to make this big slab right at the launch. We went up there 2 weeks ago, and only 4 of those slats were in the water. And that max depth was probably about 1.5 feet, maybe, at the deepest. And right off of that, normally it's all covered with water. Okay, and guys were having issues for the past couple of years. Now you put your boat down there, and if you hang off the edge of that slab, it's straight down because you're not supposed to power load there, but guys are power loading, and it causes a big wash out there. And that means that once you get at the edge of that slab, boom, drops straight down. And guys are going to be losing some assholes. I'll tell you that right now. If we don't get higher water levels, it's going to be dangerous to launch at. So people need to be aware that, especially if you're coming from out of state, you want to come to Green Bay, you've never been there before, and also you get to launch, you're like, shit, what do I do? It's unlaunchable. So the options that we've got right now are greatly diminished. The 2 options that we've got for the most part right now that I would say are the best, we've got the Metro launch right at the mouth of the Fox River in Green Bay, and then we've got another one in Oconto, which is another 40 minutes north of there. So those are the 2 that I would say are really decent on that west shore. Again, we've got Pensauke, which could be problematic. We've got the Gano's launch, which is problematic because, again, people might have trouble getting in or out. There's also a launch in Swamico, which is a public launch, which is really well maintained. Last year, I only fished out there. I'm usually not out there past early mid-October. I heard some guys that water came down even further, and guys were launching out of Swamico, having some issues out there as well. So Swamico could be a challenge as well. So I just need people to understand that I would say check online, whatever. There's plenty of Green Bay fishing groups and stuff like that, or call Tilke at Smokies on the Bay and ask them what's going on, or reach out to me. I'm out there. I'm more than happy to help people I'm seeing out there, help them understand what some of the challenges may be. Again, especially if you come from out of state, come all this way and all of a sudden you can't launch, or at least launch where you want to. So that's going to be pretty challenging this year. And it's some of these tributaries too, like on the Peshtigo, there's a lot of sandbars and stuff like that, bigger boats aren't going to be able to, unless you got a flat bottom aluminum boat or something like that, or a duck skiff, some of these areas are going to be unfishable. Obviously, because of the lower water, it means there's fewer places for these fish to hide, but it's going to be more difficult to get to these fish because of how low the water levels are. So we're hoping that we get every April. I pray that we get 4 feet of snow and rain between now and the opener to raise things back up. But if things don't come back up, again, this is cyclical, and it's probably going to take another couple of years before this stuff starts rising again. So just a watch out there to be careful, because this is dangerous water. It's especially if you hit that Gano's Reef or something like that, people will die out here, and not exaggerate. We need to be very careful, especially on big water. If there's big waves, things like that, it can turn from an awesome day to the worst nightmare in a matter of seconds, unfortunately. So please be careful.
Totally. Appreciate the safety speech there, Bob, because big water is scary. There's no doubt about that. But greatly appreciate you coming on, Bob, and kind of adding some clarity to some clarity to some clouds that have kind of been hanging over the muskie community for the last few weeks. If you want your voice heard, go to the Conservation Congress. That's a great place to have it heard, whether you're for or against. I think that there are a lot of people who have strong feelings that very closely align with mine out there. And even though I can't be there, I appreciate those of you who I've talked to, both through text, through calls, conversations, who will be there advocating for the resources as best we see fit. So appreciate you, Bob, coming on. And if you've got any last words, final things to pump, feel free. Otherwise, probably sign her off here.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity here to at least get some information out there. And also just want to wish everybody, an awesome season this year, 2026. Stick a bunch of fish, stick some pigs, and, hope to see you guys in the water.
Totally. It's crazy to say that at this point, but yeah, have a great season. And it's upon us already. So thank you so much for coming on, Bob.
Great. We're already in mid preseason right now, so it's go time for me. Obviously not fishing or anything, but as far as recon, things like that, and putting the puzzle pieces together before we actually hit the water, so that once the opener comes around, we've got a solid game plan that we can follow until ice up.
Yep. I think it's cool. We're all in this together. We want the best for the fish and the resource, and however that manifests, that's what we hope for. So thank you again, Bob, and I will catch you soon. Someday I will join you on the bay. I promise. It will happen. I cannot wait. I have to get out there and grind. But anyway, I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you again, Bob, and we'll see you guys soon.
All right, take care, everybody.
Peace.